Good afternoon from Vienna. We are here in a beautiful room in the G building of the Vienna International Center. And I am Anna Albazzi del Frate. I am the current chair of the Committee on Sustainable Development of the NGOs in Vienna. And we are here with a group of excellent speakers that I will introduce in the next round for an information day on occasion of the Commission on the Status of Women in New York. And I would like to give the floor to Evelyn Dürrmayer, who is the chair of the Committee on the Status of Women here in Vienna, to tell us more about what's going on in New York and what we are doing here. Evelyn.
Well, thank you, Anna, for giving me the floor. Welcome to those who are in the room with a beautiful view, but probably cannot match with the view you have in New York. Linda and Patricia, welcoming all the three speakers on our list. I'm very excited about this combination of topics, how we could combine them in artificial intelligence, the UN Cyber Convention, and the Every Woman Treaty, and the new optional protocol to the CEDAW Convention. And also there is a link, of course, not only to CSW 69, but also to Beijing Plus 30. And I would like just to mention to you that yesterday, as you know, the meeting of the Commission started. And during the morning, they agreed on what this time, because every 5 years, according to the Beijing Plus 25, this time 30, there is no agreed conclusion, but a political declaration. And this political declaration was signed on consensus, without amendments, without critical issues from some who were supposed to intervene. So this is really a good news. And besides this political declaration, which was, there is a bureau at CSW, the chair is a diplomat from Saudi Arabia. He was very much criticized at the beginning, but according to what I heard yesterday on Zoom from the Austrian delegation, he did well his work, and especially the diplomats from Costa Rica and Cabo Verde, who were the facilitators for this political declaration, worked also perfectly well together. And the diplomat from the Netherlands, who is the vice chair, who is representing Western Europe and other states group, is in charge of the multi-year program, which is always combined with this political declaration. Just to mention, the declaration has 8 pages. The last one had only 7 pages, and there were all topics that interest us women and girls were in this political declaration. I don't have the final version. The topics are participation, representation, gender-based violence in conflict situation, health, reproductive rights, but no paragraph was dedicated to family. So this is a summary of this yesterday's program. There is also the speech of the UN Secretary General. You can watch it online or on UN Web TV. And this is a summary of what was happened yesterday. So I'm again giving back the floor to Anna for continuing.
Thank you very much. No, thank you, Evelyn, because the purpose of the Information Day is to bring us a little bit of the flavor of what is happening in New York and to discuss on an issue that is very relevant for Vienna, for the Vienna community. So this event today is jointly organized by three umbrella organizations. So, as I mentioned, I represent the Committee on Sustainable Development, but I am also representing the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. And Evelyn as the chair of the Committee on the Status of Women. So these three organizations together joined forces to put together a very interesting panel of speakers. So we have three speakers today, and we have two of them are online. They are connected from New York. We have Linda Whitong and we have Patricia Elias, who are luckily sitting together in the same room, and this is very helpful to have them there with a very good connection. And here I have Pavlina Pavlova sitting next to me. What is the reason for the three of them to discuss with each other? We have organized this as a panel, so as a discussion between these three experts. So Linda Whitton, who is from Soroptimist International, she's a former prosecutor. She is really a specialist on research on UN issues. She has an impressive biography that you can read on the flyer. But she carried out an analysis of the recently adopted UN Cybercrime Convention. It was just the end of December, taking a look at what it says about women and how it can protect women, which type of norms exist in that respect. And so she will tell us about that. And then we have Pavlina, who really followed very, very closely the negotiations of the ad hoc committee that negotiated the UN Convention on Cybercrime and knows everything about the background and what one state was saying and the other state was trying to, to stop. She will tell us a bit more about the reasons and what happened and what she thinks could be the potentials and limits of this convention. And then Patricia, by the way, Pavlina is now the coordinator of the working group on cybercrime of the Alliance of NGOs, Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. So who wants to follow these topics can talk to her. And then Patricia Elias, who is really leading a campaign with every human treaty, the chief of the global diplomatic campaign for every woman treaty. She is a lawyer who is now, we have already had an opportunity to talk to her in October during the Conference of the Parties of the UNTOC, UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. We had a meeting to see how the discussion on a possible optional protocol to the CEDAW, how some of the gaps that we see could be filled through that protocol. So the three of them will just talk one after the other for a first round, and then we will start putting together our questions. If you have questions, please start putting them in the chat so that the speakers can take a look and be prepared to answer them during the next rounds. Linda, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am going to start off with an introduction on the treaty that was just signed. The UN Convention Against Cybercrime was adopted recently, December 24th, 2024. It's the first comprehensive global treaty on cybercrime after 5 years of negotiations. Yes, folks, that's true. 5 years of negotiations. Why is the treaty so important? And why is there an urgent need to implement the treaty? You have to look at the preamble on the treaty to answer that question. The problem that they were, or challenges they were facing, was the cyber world, if you will, was creating new opportunities for perpetrators. It was increasing the rate and the diversity of criminal activities. It was having a negative impact on not only states, but also businesses, well-being of individuals, and societies as a whole. Without taking urgent action, the use of information and communication technology systems could have a considerable impact on the scale, speed, and scope of criminal offenses that are listed in this treaty. The increasing number of victims of cybercrime was also important because they wish to get justice for the victims and the necessity to address the needs of people who are in vulnerable situations. All of this called for urgent measures to be taken as soon as possible. Based on the above threats, they acknowledge the need to pursue appropriate legislation to deal with it, to foster international cooperation to prevent and combat such activities more effectively at the national, regional, and international levels, to establish common offenses and procedural power, and determined to deny safe havens to those who engaged in cybercrime and the crimes wherever they were committed, which in the situation of cybercrime can very easily apply to the entire world as we know it. That was a very, very smart move on their part. The crimes that they primarily addressed here had to do with hacking, cyber-enabled crimes like online child exploitation, fraud, theft, money laundering, corruption, acts of terrorism, trafficking in persons, the smuggling of migrants, illicit manufacturing of and trafficking in firearms, their parts, components, and ammunition, illicit drug trafficking, and illicit trafficking in cultural property. When I was looking at the treaty initially, from an attorney's perspective, I went, well, this is very impressive, and it really is impressive, and I thank them from the bottom of my heart for taking the steps that they have. But I said, well, how is it affecting women and girls? Well, in the preamble, the treaty recognizes the importance of maintaining a gender perspective in all relevant efforts to prevent and combat the offenses covered by this convention, in accordance with domestic law. So that was the first thing I was wondering about. If a domestic law really didn't cover this, or if for whatever reason, certain vulnerable groups who were left out of being covered, what is going to be the significance of that? Taken alone, it was going in the right direction, but could it include domestic laws that were still in conflict with existing treaties which upheld the human rights and freedom of women and girls? When I looked at the provisions that touched on gender equality, I agreed with some of the critics that argued that their efforts were limited here and often relegated to non-binding sections such as the preamble. In other words, they weren't necessarily covered in, for example, the criminal texts themselves. And I'll give you the example that immediately leapt to mind with me. Article 14 covers criminalizing offenses related to online child sexual abuse, exploitation material, and within the scope defined as producing, distributing, or possessing such material. Absolutely needed. However, Article 14 does not specifically mention women. And while it mentions children, it does not specifically mention girls. And despite broader discussions during the negotiations about the importance of gender mainstreaming and addressing the vulnerabilities, specifically of women and girls, it stayed in that general state. In addition, the failure to address women here would also make women who are physically, mentally, or economically coerced or mentally disabled, women or girls, who may not have the mental capacity to consent, more vulnerable. So I was looking at it and I'm going, well, it has girls. Well, they're covered here, but it doesn't cover women. It should cover women. And it doesn't cover women that I've mentioned that may have a handicap of some sort that would make them much less apt to be able to give consent. So I was looking at that. Now, there were some other gendered vulnerabilities, and I'll be very quick about this, that were not specifically mentioned here, but in a General Assembly resolution that followed it, the General Assembly at the UN did talk about it. That was cyber stalking It was humiliating or blackmailing victims. It was gender hate speech. Deepfake exploitation was touched on for women and girls in the treaty, but not as much detail as in the General Assembly resolution. Gender neutral language was in the treaty, but in the specific resolution, which dealt specifically with women and girls after the treaty had passed, well, strike that. After the treaty had been adopted, now it will be hopefully signed by the majority of countries. They did more the gender neutral language rather than specifically honing on women and girls in all these instances. Surveillance and privacy violations weren't really discussed as they related to women and girls. And again, all of these issues, women and girls are much more affected than men and boys are. Economic cybercrimes. Everyone is apt now to be a victim of some sort of cyber crime or economic crime, unless they're so very, very careful. But especially like older women, or women that may have been, sheltered, that didn't understand how to deal with computers, how to do critical thinking about this doesn't sound right, this isn't right. Those people would be even more vulnerable at this point because it really wasn't represented thoroughly. I don't exactly know why that occurred. I wouldn't presume to know what was going on with the states, but it is my urgent and fervent hope that they will quickly correct some of these oversights, because the women and girls who are such a vulnerable group can't be waiting indefinitely to be included. Just briefly, there were a couple of other issues that really weren't addressed here, which is the gender digital divide.
You can tell us in the next round, so that
I can. I just had one more. The gender digital divide and human rights issues were really covered as well as they perhaps should have been. And that is what I call a Reader's Digest overview of the treaty, the pros and the cons. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you for framing this in the first round. Now let's see what Pavlina can tell us from Vienna. So what do you think about the gender issues in the negotiations and in the final text of the convention?
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure on this occasion. So I'm extremely happy to discuss the Cybercrime Convention and the negotiations as such, how stakeholders participated, and also what role did gender play or didn't play in it. And we'll unwrap it in the next hour or so. So I will keep my introductory remark brief. I would like to also address what was in the first kind of introduction to the Cybercrime Convention, because there's some also context to the document as such. So first of all, the UN Cybercrime Convention was a product of Russian resolution. Western like-minded countries didn't want the convention because there already exists legally binding document, which is, though, if we may say so, regional. It's not a document that would be a UN treaty, but it's available to anyone who wants to join. So it is an international legally binding document. It's called Budapest Convention of the Council of Europe, which already exists and provides framework for most of the things that the UN Convention addresses. But this Budapest Convention was not accepted by Russia and other countries who didn't want to join it, and demanded to have a UN Convention to prevent cybercrime. Western like-minded countries were pointing out that instead of a new framework, more effective way would be enable better cooperation and investigation of cyber crimes through cyber capacity building. Because what is now oftentimes problem is that law enforcement agencies don't know how to request data from private companies, or they don't know how to investigate these crimes, especially for smaller countries and less developed countries. In cyber methods and forensics, this is this is the key issue. We are also speaking about international cooperation within the countries which say in the convention that they want to address safe havens, but from the evidence we know that there is a big four of countries, which are namely Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, which do harbor a massive chunk of cyber criminals worldwide. So we are discussing cybercrime treaties with countries which do use these cyber criminal groups as their proxies, and at the same time say that they want to address the issue of safe havens, and also what have been mapped very well with the evidence throughout the years is that a cybercrime legislation, especially if it's very vague and expansive language, etc., is misused by the same countries for state overreach. So cracking down on all the vulnerable populations, all those who are impacted overly with cybercrime, which are often women, and especially women in prominent positions, whether they're activists, human rights defenders, politicians, journalists, or lawyers. So we have like more kind of complex landscape in which the Cybercrime Convention has been negotiated. And we have also toward the very end, when it comes specifically to gender, what was very interesting is that while countries in the beginning were rather reluctant to embrace the topic, gender featured very prominently across the discussions. It's also thanks to the great work of many organizations and stakeholders who were included in those negotiations. And I'm very happy to discuss later how exactly stakeholders played their role. But I will make justice to the great work of Chatham House, which had whole positions and activities around mainstreaming gender in the Cybercrime Convention, but also Association for Progressive Communications and Global Partners Digital were very heavily involved in the negotiations and arguing for including gender even more. I would be very happy to go into the details on the gender later on. I've at this point find it very important that for example, at the very end, when we are speaking about the countries and how they embrace gender, at the very end of the negotiations, Iran called for a vote in 6 rounds on basically any human rights safeguard and mention of gender. So they try to remove even the little kind of language that is included there, and they try to water down the convention when it comes to this kind of language. And of course, Russia and Iran and many others are the countries which oppose such mentions of gender in general, in all the documents. These proposals didn't pass, so there is a gender language, but it's not, the convention is still not fully embracing gender sensitive and gender responsive approaches. What I find very important are three more considerations, and I will wrap up my introductory remarks. The first is on the nuance between women and girls and vulnerable groups. What also featured heavily in the discussions is that women and girls do have specific and often more severe impact of cybercrime. And we can then discuss whether it's non-consensual sharing of intimate images or doxing, stalking, the use of spyware, the use of technologies in gender-based violence and in family abuse and intimate partner abuse, etc. But at the same time, many very much human rights-leaning countries or those who were bearing this issue in the negotiations and stakeholders were particular about not putting women and girls in the same category as vulnerable groups, because women and girls, while they may be because of societal and historical and different kind of gaps in this position, they are not vulnerable by themselves, they're vulnerable because of the context. So let's address the context and not assign them as vulnerable groups. At the same time, it's important to say that, for example, sextortion in the end as a crime was not included, and sextortion for financial means, and we are not speaking non-consensual dissemination of intimate images, which has some overlaps with sextortion because it's image-based abuse. But sextortion as a crime especially targets young male, for example, so for financial purposes. So it's important when we speak gender and women issues to also highlight that we're discussing this not only to help one group, however important, however women are majority group anyway, but we are trying to address differentiated impacts, including impacts on men and boys, because then it's just that the cybercrime legislation, the capacity which comes with it, can better address these issues and be sensitized to the victims. What is also important is that speech offenses for now were not included per se, though because the convention says that any serious crime may be part of exchange of electronic evidence. Speech offenses, stakeholders do believe that they should not be included because these are very expensive and there is no common language on what is, for example, incitement to terrorism or false news and such that. So at the same time, image-based abuse, so non-consensual sharing of intimate images and CSAM have been included in the convention, and this will hopefully provide feedback for countries who do not have this particular offense of non-consensual sharing of intimate images, because there are many of them globally. This will provide some motivation and capacity and framework how to do that. And my final point would be on because we'll be also discussing new technologies and AI and how it's connected to image-based offenses, etc. At the beginning, I would like to say that what was also argued throughout the convention is not specific for this convention, but for cyber-related legislation, is to be technology agnostic. So more focused on how to kind of control the behavior, what is criminal, what is not, etc., rather than particular technologies, because technologies do change. So oftentimes these kind of treaties or law will not, for example, say specifically about how the abuse happened or whether it was, for example, a ransomware attack behind something, but it will speak more in a technology agnostic way. So this is what happened in the convention. So it's more neutral on the language, which specific technologies needs to be misused, which then I believe opens the way for national legislations to embrace also synthetic images, so those generated through artificial intelligence, such as, for example, is already happening in a few countries, especially lately with the United Kingdom legislation, which is quite progressive.
Okay, no, thank you. A lot of food for thought. Thank you very much, Pavlina. So, Patricia, we heard quite a lot of things to do. So, we're really looking forward to hearing some prospects from your campaign, Patricia.
Thank you so much for having me. And as we have heard Linda and Pavlina, situation is not easy for women and girls because they were not really taken into consideration in this convention. I am Patricia Elias, the Chief of Global Diplomatic Campaign of Every Woman Treaty. Every Woman Treaty is 4,000 grassroots activists and NGOs all over 169 countries, working for one aim: ending violence against women and girls through a new optional protocol to CEDAW dedicated to end violence against women and girls. Why? And today we have 16 nations, 4 special rapporteurs, and the African Union that are supporting this initiative. I am here to discuss how to improve protections for women and girls in the area of artificial intelligence. AI is transforming how we address gender equality, offering tools for crisis response and violence prevention. The digital age has also ushered in sophisticated forms for gender-based violence, including AI being used as a tool to harm women and girls. AI-generated images and videos used to harass, threaten, and control women and girls has risen sharply, including a 550% from 2019 to 2023. 550% increase in the presence of the AI generated deepfake porn roles, with 99% of it targeting women. So this is why we say that women and girls are the primary victims of those practices. Moreover, when AI models use existing language models, patriarchal gender norms are perpetuated and reinforced. The recent adoption of the UN Cybercrime Convention marks a critical step in addressing online exploitation. It provides a global framework for cooperation against cyber-enabled crimes and established protections. Article 16, for example, criminalizes non-consensual dissemination of intimate images, like you said. However, the conventions lacks gender-specific protection for AI-facilitated gender-based violence. As Pavlina said, when you are gender neutral, it means you are not taking into consideration women and girls. You cannot be gender neutral. As we saw, 90% of victims are women and girls. So it does not fully address how AI-fueled cyber abuse disproportionately affects women and marginalized groups. And it does not yet provide a human rights-centered, survivor-focused response to these emerging threats. The gap highlights the need for a new optional protocol to CEDAW. A new optional protocol dedicated to ending violence against women and girls, including in the online and AI-driven landscape, would bridge the gap left by existing legal instruments. It could criminalize the use of non-consensual AI-driven images and exploitation, establish binding commitments to protect women and girls from their use, establish clear procedural measures for offenders, reaffirm that no technological advancement justifies the harm of women and the erosion of women's rights. Broadly, the new optional protocol would greatly strengthen the global legal framework on addressing violence against women and girls by codifying norms and standards in a single comprehensive document that addresses all forms of violence against women and girls, under all circumstances and spheres, for all women globally. History teaches us that meaningful progress in human rights is only possible through unity and unwavering determination. Countering AI-enabled violence and furthering AI for gender equality requires a strategic and unified response. AI is not inherently our adversary, nor is it our savior. It is a tool. The question before us is not whether AI will shape the future or gender equality, but how we choose to govern it to shape the future for gender equality. So the UN Cybercrime Convention is a step, but it cannot be the final one. If we are serious about harnessing AI for good, if we wish to see justice, dignity, and equality in the digital stage, we must complement it with the dedicated optional protocol to CEDAW that will protect women and girls from AI violence also. Thank you, ladies, and I am counting on each one of you to speak to their countries, to have more states joining the score for the optional protocol to CEDAW. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Yes, I think we can give a collective first round of applause for these speakers. It's difficult not to be collocated. And Patricia, can you just tell us again, so you have already a group of states that
16 countries, plus the African Union, plus 4 special rapporteurs on violence against women and girls that are calling for the optional protocol. And hopefully, after CSW, some more will join.
Very good. So the CSW will be an opportunity to campaign, of course. So we have heard a first round. I think that someone wanted to ask a question, but I cannot find the question. Sorry for my poor IT skills. So is there anyone who wanted to ask a first question at this point? We have one in the room online. just know if you have. Okay, so we can go with the question in the room, please.
Okay.
Introduce yourself.
African Women Organization and First of Vienna. I wanted to ask, since 90% are women and girls who are the victims, yeah, why is the treaty then not more towards women? Does it mean it's only men that work on it, or women who have no feeling for other women? And what can we do that this thing is changed?
Thank you very much for the question. So I think that this is a good point, because we heard from different backgrounds, from different entry points. We heard the difficulty of the negotiations. And don't forget that, for example, one of these well-known difficulties was addressed immediately before the negotiation started by deciding that the negotiations for this convention would take place partially in Vienna and partially in New York. Why is that? Maybe Pavlina can explain us a bit more for what reason the different processes in different UN multilateral fora may facilitate advancing on negotiations on sensitive issues, on difficult topics. So I would like to give the floor back to the three speakers so they can address this first question and add to their first statement. In the meantime, if there are other questions, please put them in the chat and nowhere else, otherwise we lose them. Thank you very much. Linda, the floor is yours again.
Yes. Yes, I won't go into any further issues that I saw. But I will do my best to try and answer this question. I suspect that there was a lot more dissension and caution when it came to create an actual treaty. But I would be interested in the background of the negotiations, if that can be shared with us at a later point, because that might shed some light on my question. I do think that they do have now something that they could use as a protocol for future editions, and that is the UN General Assembly resolution that happened after this did. It was being discussed, but it actually passed around the same time frame. And I thought it had very good language, and there were a number of countries that already agreed to that language. So I would encourage the creators who will be making either an optional protocol under CEDAW to take a very careful reading of that resolution, and I will cheerfully provide it to all of you. It just makes me purr when I look at it. So I think they already have a tentative roadmap.
I would say that the problem is now for women to be protected, they have to go to CEDAW, to the UN Cybercrime Convention, to the resolution, I mean, we are activists and we don't know where to find all the ways. What do you think about those 90% of women of the world to be protected? How will they do? We need to codify, unify everything in one convention that would be the new optional protocol to CEDAW for every woman in the whole world to be protected. I will give a small example. When I was also for 5 years a UN woman working with senior advisor on women's gender and women political participation. We have trained Arab women, like 259 to be in the elections, and one of them ran to be president. What happened is a group of men did cyber violence against them. They went to Turkey. They created a group and they were harassing, bullying them. It was huge. None of them could appear, could have a Facebook. I mean, how can you be a candidate if you cannot be on social media? So we connected with Meta, and Meta discovered that they were it's a group of like terrorists between us, and from where they were, and they shot their but those women alone couldn't have succeeded in shutting them. This is why we are saying we need everything to be crystal clear in one place that will protect women against violence against women and girls. Thank you.
Hey, excellent, of course.
Thank you. I think there was also some misrepresentation because when it comes to the Cybercrime Convention, it's a very wide scope document with wide criminalization, which was also heavily criticized. In the end, the document rather went to narrower criminalization, but at the same time having some tricky provisions how it can be open up on exchange of electronic evidence and international cooperation. It was heavily criticized by the stakeholders for having, especially involving a lot of mutual legal assistance provisions, which may be misused by especially authoritative countries, and at the same time involving procedural powers and law enforcement, which without the necessary safeguards may end up with violating rights of people at large. And this is a convention which has a wide scope, what it includes, and at the same time, it will, even if it's adopted as a patchwork, depending which countries sign it, which countries adopt it, how they translate it into their national legislation, because that's how things will change in effect when it's translated into their national legislations. It is a document which will have an effect on cybercrime law and practices globally for decades to come. At the same time, it includes many offenses. And when we come to gender-specific offenses, these are basically Article 14 to 16 of the criminalization. All the others, it has to be said, like not every cybercrime have a specific gender considerations. There are cybercrimes, including those in technology facilitated, what has been recognized as technology facilitated gender-based violence, which have this exaggerated impact on women and girls or men and boys, but at the same time, like a lot of a cybercrime will be against organizations and will not have this gender dimension. So it also makes kind of rational for having the inclusion of gender. And I will just say that the gender language has been included in the preamble, recognizing also gender mainstreaming and emphasizing the importance of addressing online gender-based violence, and also in the prevention chapters, which this treaty includes, specifically on focusing on women considerations. So it's not like women have been completely omitted, but what would have been nice, for example, is more mainstreaming throughout the articles, and also ensuring active promotion of gender equality, which is for many countries extremely controversial topic, as we know. So this did not happen, but at the same time, it does have these gender considerations, and also considerations for vulnerable communities, or better said, people in vulnerable situations. What is also important is to strengthen, when it's being applied, to strengthen the protection for and support for victims of cybercrime and witnesses of cybercrime. So those provisions which serve maybe more women, for example, does not need to spell out women necessarily. It's good practice. And also it's very important that the key problem is that the human rights safeguards, which could protect these groups from state overreach and misuse of these legislations, are limited to the minimum what is needed for international cooperation between the agencies. I think when it comes to how the genders are applied across different cybercrimes, it's very hard to say, because the evidence is simply not there for many cybercrimes. Cybercrime as such, especially crimes which are victimizing vulnerable individuals, go largely underreported. So just like reporting and having this data, and even having gender specific data, so we know how many men and how many women are impacted by crimes, it's still a work to do. And one of the key recommendations coming from research and stakeholders, like, we just don't know enough. We know that there are certain crimes impacting women specifically. For example, AI sexualized images, like 95 to 99% impact women, etc. But there will be, as I mentioned, for example, sextortion, which is heavily impacting men. possibly 9 out of 10, according to some surveys. And at the same time, when it comes to CSAM, so image-based abuse of children, both boys and girls are being victimized roughly in the same numbers worldwide from the surveys I've seen, all the data. So yes, human rights safeguards are the key problem, which have been distinguished by many countries and also by the stakeholders. And finally, I think we're mentioning different protocols, because when it comes to UN Cybercrime Convention, there is the convention as such has a potential for having additional protocol when it needs 40 countries to ratify to become UN instrument, and then when it reaches 60 countries, they can discuss additional protocol. What is while if we take it outside of the context, additional protocol may be a good thing if good things are agreed. What is very much worrying for the stakeholder community and some countries as well, who do not want to hear about additional protocol at this point, is that it's believed that countries who didn't get the provisions on speech, which they wanted in the initial document, so spelling out like cooperation on terrorist offenses or speech, or incitement to terrorism and incitement to extremism, and similar kind of provisions, will use this to introduce those offenses specifically. And we know that they have also gender in their impact. Such legislation have been used to crack down on populations, and especially on those who are already targeted, and those are oftentimes also women or gender minorities.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Indeed, this convention has not entered into force yet. There will be signature ceremony, is planned in Vietnam. I don't know when. When is that?
Early July.
In July. Okay. So we let's see what kind of participation will be there. So if the 40, 50 signatures, how many is necessary for the entry into force, what will be? Indeed, there are some issues that we have discussed about the fact of legally binding documents and the effect of these documents talking to each other to reach the ideal setting that Patricia was proposing, to have everything in one place. I think that this would be the dream. But we have some examples in some processes. I was particularly familiar with the processes of firearms and women. In some cases, the most effective way to reach something like that was to have exactly the same provision repeated, mirrored in the two processes. So, for example, in the resolutions subsequent to 1325 on women, peace and security, at a certain point, there are some resolutions that are taken from the women processes and some that are taken from the firearms processes that are just repeated exactly with the same language. And that could be very effective because it is exactly what Patricia says. Wherever you go, you will find the same language. Anyone else who wants to add questions, because I'm going to give the floor again to the speakers. So if they have we have from the chat a point about the ombudsman.
Suggestion.
Yes, about the specialized ombudsman.
Ombudswoman.
Ombudsperson, where
They were paying attention.
Could get help, would be capable of accomplishing the work in a satisfying way. So the speakers may also reflect on this point. Any other questions before I give the floor back to New York and to Pavlina in the room? No? Okay, so colleagues in New York, Linda and Patricia, back to you.
Yeah, I will cover a couple of other critical observations, some which may have been covered by the question that were posed. There was trouble about being a broad scope and ambiguity, especially with the open-ended evidence sharing and criminalization, potentially targeting potential dissidents, human rights offenders, or security researchers under vague provisions. And the ongoing theme here is going to be who's minding the store, who is out there making sure it's monitored fairly, and that there's accountability for people who stray from adhering to the human rights. The human rights concerns also were exhibiting a little bit of a concern about blanket data retention, and encryption breaking devices, misuse of cross-border cooperation mechanisms, because what one country might ethically deal with in a human rights oriented matter, another country might go human rights, what human rights? I'm not mentioning any countries. Resource and capacity gaps. This is one that's around the world, I think. Many countries are lacking the resources and expertise to implement the treaty effectively and are creating disparities in enforcement and cooperation. They're also going to be lacking the resources and expertise to have someone like a ombudsman, if you will, overseeing the gathering of evidence and the implementation of this treaty, adhering to human rights, because they don't have the training, they don't have the resources, or they don't have the capacity. So that's definitely going to be an issue, I believe, that we're going to have to address. Diverging state interests. Now, rumor has it that there were disagreements over the scope of crimes that were being covered, that political speech or religious values were complicating the consensus, with some states advocating for broader criminalization beyond cyber crimes. And I could see where some of the states might get a little bit skittish about expanding it to other than basic cyber crimes. Legal risk for companies apparently became an issue too, with the companies saying that broad language like Articles 18 and 19 increased liability risks for tech companies, and they were arguing potentially would stifle their innovation and their routine operations. I suspect that safer stronger safeguards, clearer definitions, and capacity building efforts could solve that problem. And that I think the businesses have to absolutely join us in trying to make cybersecurity fair, productive, and make the cyber world able to offer equal, safe access for anyone, women, girls, boys, or men, but especially women and girls. And while they're at it, like I said before, the gender digital divide, give us the education, give us the digital literacy, give us the tools that women and girls need to work with in order to be going with the emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence rather than being controlled by it. Thank you. Next.
Yes.
Yes,
Uh,
Patricia, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying, like we said, for the porn rose, deepfake porn rose generated, the AI generated deepfake porn rose has 99% of it is targeting women. This is why we need a gender language. We cannot have a gender neutral language. And also yesterday I was in the panel with Montenegro, and they were saying that women in politics, like 6 out of 10 women in politics will quit because of harassment, cyber harassment, violence against women in politics. And this, you don't have it against men, it's against women in politics. And I've witnessed it because in UN Women, my specialty was women political participation. And this, we need to have women in power. We need to have women in political place, high level political decision maker. And this harassment, the cyberbullying, this cyber harassment, some of them couldn't even have their picture or any word on internet, on the cyber play system, cyberspace, not Facebook, not Insta, not at all. And what is the problem is what? They are so much harassed that they have to stop and close their own social media account. What does it mean? It's a death. It's the death for them, for their career, for their political career. So they are obliged, they are to quit. And this is what we don't want to do. This is what I was saying, that being gender neutral is being criminal against gender and against women's right and girls' right, because we are seeing by the facts that the most impacted are women and girls, like for this 99%, and a rise of 550% since 2019 to 2023. This is why I'm saying we need to have this new optional protocol to CEDAW, where all women are protected against all form of discrimination, and particularly cyber violence and cyber AI violence.
And I would go one step further, folks. It doesn't stop online. If some woman wants to take
Yes.
a political or social platform,
Yes.
she may be pulling herself offline and no longer have a platform,
This is
but
it.
the threats can keep coming either via other ways, and they can be physical, and they can even result in murder. And what's particularly disturbing too is that we are seeing in the countries, in one of the latest surveys, we're seeing a greater pushback against women and girls in their own countries. So we can't assume any longer that all of the countries and the people within it are going to be fair to women and girls. So this makes it even scarier. Or put another way, Patricia, keeps us up a little bit more at night, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say personally, I had this experience. I was a candidate to be an MP for the French Parliament, representing all Africa and the Middle East. And I was independent. And because I was so strong, coming strong, and could have been a danger to the political party that was against me, they constructed a whole website against me. With, I mean, every day putting things like, they don't do this against men, they do this against women, because we are threatening the patriarchy, we are threatening the power of patriarchy. And it was so huge that I had to go and fill a complaint, but this was in France, so I could do it. But imagine if I was in some country, so we are not living all in Europe and in a country with protection. We need to protect the 90% of women of the world that needs this protection. This is why we need to have this new optional protocol to CEDAW to protect all women of the world and make it a safe place for them for the future. Thank you.
One more little thing here, one more from the
Yeah.
other. They have to cover the whole world, and that was why jurisdiction is so very important. And as an ex-prosecutor, trust me, jurisdiction can be the end all or be all. So someone, for example, was trying to harass her in her own country, that's covered. But what if it's Joe Jerk across the continent? Well, with this new treaty, we're hoping that jurisdiction will get its little hands as far as we need to, grab them by the scruff of their neck and get them into court to be held accountable.
Good point. Yes, I want to give the floor to Paulina, but there is this issue of the convention being gender neutral, that I don't think it is exactly gender neutral. I think that it is very poor in terms of gender language, because it limits itself, as Paulina has said, to the introduction, the prevention, and then there is just a general, with due consideration to gender, at the end of article, which article is that? 18, I think, the one that covers more women. Yes, I forgot the number of the article. I don't think that it is completely neutral. It is just really very dry in addressing these issues. So how do you think, Paulina, can civil society, we are here in meetings of civil society, how can we be outspoken and constructive in explaining to member states what we see as missing.
Yes, so thank you. First of all, I must correct myself. If I said gender neutral, it's not what I meant. I was speaking about technology being technology agnostic, and I meant technology neutral. So this is important when we adopt new technologies, and this is a good practice. When I was part of an NGO, we did argue for being technology neutral because the technologies now, it's AI-based abuse through AI generators, but it may be image-based abuse through different technologies, and we cannot change conventions every single time. And this is a good practice that was part of the convention. So I didn't say gender neutral. If I said it, I didn't mean it. I meant technology neutral. It does include gender mainstreaming in the convention. It could have been stronger. I think, like, for anyone who wasn't part of the negotiations and makes sense of it, why it ever happened, is that apart from some countries being disgruntled about the Budapest Convention, is also to have upper hand over data requests from private companies, because most of the infrastructure on which our online communication and our happens, and not just communication, but like the whole digital layer of our society, it's massively owned and operated by the private sector. So anytime that cybercrimes need to be investigated and then prosecuted, and they need evidence, and then needs the evidence to be exchanged among the countries, it comes down to data requests from private companies. There has been a lot of kind of frustration between countries and their law enforcement and private companies in general. And private companies also admit that it is a process which needs more capacity to understand each other. I will not go there into details. I will just say that at the same time, we are discussing every single country, and we see how these requests are being also misused, and the exchange of electronic evidence is being misused. And just one point which, for example, featured prominently when showing why when it comes to exchange of evidence, it can be difficult, and why the jurisdiction that we can reach out to other countries can also have many negatives, is that, for example, when you are LGBTQI activist in Russia, it is an offense if you show it publicly. And if you are, for example, in part of different marches, it can mount up to serious crime or serious offense under the convention. And then even a crime which would not be part of the convention per se may amount to exchange of electronic evidence on these individuals. So it's just very important that whatever power is being discussed, it can be at the same time, and we saw it with many different parts of legislation being transformed somewhere else. It sounds good on a paper. It may be used very justly for good purposes and to get more data, to get more criminals, accountability for their crimes, etc., and protect the victims. At the same time, we are having an instrument which will be kind of transformed into every single legislation, and not every single, but let's say it's a global instrument, so to many and have an influence, and everything is a double-edged sword in this regards, and hence the emphasis throughout the negotiations for very strong safeguards that we can prevent as much as it happens. So when it comes to language, the same. A lot of repetition has been happening between from Budapest Convention. So it's important to say these two instruments, because Budapest Convention is the most known instrument on cybercrime. There are others like Malabo Convention of the African Union, but Budapest Convention has been the most acceded to as an instrument. They largely follow that language, and also of UNTOC and UNCAC, and Ala Paula could speak about it because she covered marvelously in her analysis on then how they are being translated into this mechanism, and why some repetition of language is good, because what we don't want is that the legislation or the commitments, and especially legally binding commitments of states, clash, because then you just have havoc, right? Like you cannot operate. But at the same time, like having these provisions put into the cybercrime and like cyber context, these may have many unintended consequences. And when it comes to speech offenses, where I, like doing research on how female politicians are being specifically targeted, how much hate compounds when, exactly as it was mentioned, it doesn't start or end with the image abuse. It just repeats, and there is research confirms that there is much more hate compounded under the post against women than against men. And there have been, for example, seeing the gender dimension, sometimes because doctored images have existed against politicians for a long time. What is now different is that, like, on a click, you have AI generator, which looks very authentic. So this changed in the past years, and it's commercially available to large amounts of population. But doctored images have been around for a very, very long time. So, for example, one very interesting case happened in 2016 in Georgian elections, when doctored images were used against women, men, and an LGBTQI man, whose political careers and elections it influenced was women and a queer individual. It did not have an impact on men. So we do see this gender dimension and the compound of hatred against under disinformation posts or image-based abuse of women. And there have been who is interested in like AI generating also deepfake porns. There have been very famous cases also in Europe. Federica, what is it? No, Federica, Meloni. Sorry, I was confusing two names. But Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, is still, Giorgia Meloni is still suing the perpetrators who did this kind of AI deepfake porn of her. And then there was a very famous case of Irish politician who faced this during the elections, and here it comes down to like how long-term is the abuse, because the video happens and then the abusive calls, the abusive language, and what she said very much resonated with me, is that like she lost the control over her image to the public, and as a politician, like that's your bread and butter. What you can, and this effectively everyone understood that this is AI generated, but at the same time, like you just lose control. You feel like you lose your credibility. She did manage to be elected into the parliament, but at the same time, you just feel like you lose control over your agency. And these scams often happen when they happen to women in power. They try to create these negative role models. So we scare you and we scare all the other women. So they do not even attempt to participate, because who would willingly go into this? And we've seen also, speaking about NCII, so there is a long way. I'm extremely happy that it is part of the national convention, because international convention, because we spoke, for example, with prosecutors who said like we had these files on our table and we couldn't do anything, because, for example, when you take Budapest Convention, and countries were part of it, and if you follow this framework, only if your device is cracked, you can go and investigate and prosecute NCII. But if it's not, if it has been shared in voluntarily at some point, but it was with consent, with your consent, in, for example, intimate relationships, and then shared and distributed without your consent, some countries do not have frameworks for that. So this is a great opportunity. At the same time, it will take, like, not to be overly optimistic, because nowadays we have countries which use different provisions to even crack on women whose sexualized materials have been published. And we have these cases in Egypt when a famous woman would have her device stolen, and the pictures by the perpetrators would publish the pictures, and she was fined and put into prison for a 2-year sentence. So we have a long way to go to sensitize the countries, to raise awareness, build the capacity there. And this is where stakeholders do come in, because they already do a lot of work. They use different kind of tools which make this more impactful and can cooperate with law enforcement agencies, and also civil society have been sensitizing the discussions for a very long time, especially on technology-based gender-based violence. And they already did a fair share in the cybercrime negotiations, and I did mention some organizations at the very beginning in my intervention, and there is a long way to go on this cooperation.
If I may add, because Patricia and I, when I were talking about technology being neutral, it's been our experience, and we're hoping that it's going to change drastically and urgently, that there's a gender bias in terms of applying to programs, applications of programs, services, employment, to just name three that have come to our immediate attention. And so I think when the men maybe in Silicon Valley were talking about technology being neutral, it was with their particular slant. And we're hoping that that will be.
I think, Linda, that the example that you can refer is the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. That convention didn't want to list crimes, didn't want to list the types of organized crime, because they said that the criminal groups, they are so creative that tomorrow they will invent some other type of trafficking. And indeed, it happened. So they decided not to have a list. And this convention doesn't have a list of technologies. So it doesn't address separately these technologies, because tomorrow there will be a new one. And if it is not there, that will be a problem for the credibility and for the usability of the convention. You want to add something?
Yes.
Well, but except you can, excuse me, you can do the attorneys have limit, but list the things and then, but limited not to the following. In other words, you always, God bless that legal clause, you know, including but not limited to, and then you list it. I think that at some point they're going to have to address it.
And for me, they have to put gender, because we have heard some countries in the Human Rights Council saying that nowhere is it written that women's rights are human rights. Do you see? So this is why I want to say, no, we have to list it, so nobody can say women's rights are not human rights. Yes, they are, and they have to be everywhere, including in the cyber convention.
I just wanted one correction, and I do regret using the neutral ever.
No, I didn't say neutral. I didn't say neutral, but I said
technology is neutral. It's absolutely biased. It's so biased that we are just realizing how biased it is, and I'm not even going to the bias because
no. I've read it. I've read the convention, and I was shocked because it is not.
What I said is that like
representative.
convention has been created as like technology neutral, so technology agnostic, which means that you do not specifically say.
But I would say,
I don't know, like let's stop ransomware, but let's stop.
I understand, but I mean, it cannot be technology.
Technology is very much biased.
Yeah. It has to take gender in consideration. This is what I was saying.
Listening to you all, what is badly needed is implementation rules, so something that can accompany the use of the convention, explaining, not limited to explaining that when it talks about gender, then talk about women and girls, men and boys, etc., etc. The language that we see missing, that we don't see.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
So that I think that once we will have a considerable group of states who ratify, most probably they will decide to get into this type. That was the same for the other conventions. That there are these rules of procedure that you can consult, and they are a dynamic process that sees the contribution by many. We have a question in the chat that is broader, that is referring to the issue of trafficking in persons and victims of crime in general. So I will connect this question that we see in the chat, you can see it also there, with going further in the participation of multi-stakeholders. This was a peculiarity of the process of the negotiations of the Cybercrime Convention. That was these multi-stakeholder groups that included a prominent role for private sector. So what can the private sector do as an ally to civil society in advancing on these issues? Paulina, what do you think?
So the modalities were widely cheered too as very good for stakeholders, because in many processes, for example, states have veto power. Here, it would have been voted on, basically. So it was difficult to veto organization, which ended up with some 200 organizations. And we have the multi-stakeholder community there, right? So we have human rights organizations, we have private sector there, we have cyber policy organizations, and whoever who wanted to participate and send a letter explaining their relevant work could participate. And what was very specific about these negotiations is that toward the end, you would have, and I don't think it will repeat again, on the broad lines, you have human rights organizations saying the same thing as private companies. And this was rather unique. Is this completely the same? Maybe not, because the interests are different, and every stakeholder has its own interest. But having relevant work on cybercrime, they greatly contributed to the negotiations, though there have been quite frustration toward the end that the feedback, while it was enabled, wasn't and encouraged, wasn't really taken into consideration in the full, but it is a consensus-based process, it's a state-based process, so there are limitations also to how a single country can achieve, so not even speaking about how a single stakeholder can achieve. What was professionally and personally great experience about being part of the negotiations is seeing the coalition building. And I think also going forward, coalition building is key, because the way that the stakeholders and especially NGOs among themselves, which often have very limited resources, shared information among each other, shared information about which delegations to connect, when to have the press releases, who are the journalists who could publish and raise awareness about the process. What have been the updates? It's just so much is happening, and not often it's being the information is shared on timely basis from the key sources. So this kind of advocacy and coalition building has been extremely successful, and toward the end you would have for example, the coalition of NGOs coming together with the kind of representatives of private sector and having joint statements. And this really did have impact, because when you have united relevant stakeholders, it does get listened to, or at least can push the balance a little bit and provide some rationale also for states who want to achieve the same things. It's not like it was states who would be one voice, there would be many different voices. And when we, for example, spoke about speech offenses, even now, and we see it very sharply, for example, European Union and the US have no understanding of what speech offense is. So just, and I know coming also from OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, there was a mandate for the Organization on Human Rights to have a mandate on hate crime, but no on hate speech. So even on hate speech, because of the US constitution. So even on hate speech, even before this administration, even before the recent developments, there is, even between key allies, there is no understanding of speech offenses, even when it comes to something as basic for us as hate crime. And we have it in our legislations in Europe quite firmly given. So just another argument for not introducing it into something which is globally legally binding for countries who sign it and ratify. And yes, and I just wanted on the civil society coalition building. It has been extremely successful from what I witnessed in the negotiations, and through the work with the alliance, through the stakeholder working group on cybercrime, we want to carry on that work, because the work didn't finish with the Cybercrime Convention being a document. The document will be translated some way, and how it's being translated will define what is the impact on those affected by cybercrime. So we are deeply committed to bring together, again, the relevant stakeholders and we do for this reason, because we've seen these rather united voice in negotiations, and also with, as I mentioned, how important are private actors, the private sector and technology companies in this whole process and implementation of the convention. It's important to have private companies alongside human rights organizations, alongside other civil society organizations, the technical community, which is getting heavily impacted by the convention, especially when we speak about unauthorized access and what does it mean for example, ethical hackers, and different associations working on including gender-specific topics to sensitize this in the implementation. So we hope to carry on this work and even strengthen the coalition building and information sharing, so NGOs are empowered to take their rightful place in the implementation.
Excellent. So you are all invited to join the working group of the Alliance that is going to work on these things so that we can have a voice. Maybe we can have more women groups in this discussion to see how the implementation can be more impactful. We have 9 minutes and we have 2 questions in the chat that can be really very good for the New York speakers, and wanted just to check online and in the room if there are any other questions, and then I will give the floor to Linda and Patricia to address these 2 last questions. Anyone who wants to ask something? Ana Paula, no? She was mentioned, but she doesn't ask questions.
We are not hearing.
Speak loud.
No, Anna asked me if I wanted to intervene on the relationship with the UNCTAD, but I said that she addressed it already, so I don't think I need to add enough to say to you both.
Okay. So if there are no other questions, I will give the floor back to Linda and Patricia to respond about the I am only a woman consideration, and to give us an update of what is going to happen in CSW, because this is also why we are here.
Well, I real briefly with the CSW, the NGOs, including Seroptimist, we were alerted that Trump did not want to use the term climate crisis. So we looked at 2020 Beijing Plus 25, where his representatives had the most beautiful paragraph, 11F, on the climate crisis and how it affects women and girls. And we brought that to their attention, along with the Secretary of State at that time, saying what a brilliant declaration that was in 2020, a fine declaration. And we sent it to the NGO state representatives, and that paragraph is now in 15R. So they the United States went from not wanting to do anything about the climate crisis to putting in a beautiful paragraph about women and girls and climate crisis. As to this morning, I have to say that this morning I have been here rather than in the UN, but in the afternoon, people were pleased about the climate crisis, but they weren't pleased with some of the other language that was being left out. Inclusive, and in some cases gender was not being left out. That's just what I had heard even later in the evening. So I suspect we have a lot of work to do, but we're grateful that there was an agreement reached, because it could have happened a different way. Patricia.
Thank you, Linda.
Patricia, because I see that Martina, who asked the question about what is happening in CSW, she raised her hand. Martina?
No, I don't raise my hand. It's just I'm very pleased to hear that through Linda's work, we as NGOs influence the outcome and the wording, and not allowing all countries not to go backwards, but maybe to go forward in the issues of of women and their right in general.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your comment. Patricia.
Yes, so about 60 women, the ambassador Dr. Anagu Augustine says that about 60% of the women in the world have biases and cannot differentiate between women respect and women right. Even when you want to push them, they will say, I am only a woman. This is why they are afraid to do politics and all the rest. What I'm saying is we are not asking of everybody, all women, to do politics. I'm not going to the village girl and telling her, come and do politics. It's something you have in you or you don't have, you know. Sometimes I had it since very young. You have it or you don't have it. And when you have it, you can go, now you have internet, you have everywhere, and you have also many capacity building with UN Women, with UN NGO and some NGOs, capacity building, to know how to have a campaign, you know, how to handle a campaign. Because what women lack is to know how to do a political campaign to win, you know, and this is very important. So they can go and have some capacity building. Just to let you know, I had this since so young, since I was 17 years old. I was in the university, and the dean, that was a woman, came and read us all the discriminatory laws against women. And so I was young and I was so shocked, and I said to myself, I will not, it's not enough to be a good lawyer. I have to be I have to be a parliamentarian. Like this, I can issue laws. And this is why I always had this idea in my head that I have to be a politician to change laws. But as an activist, I changed many laws also. And I did my campaign without any capacity building, or because I was driven by this sense of mission that I had. So or you have this, or you do some capacity building for you to do a campaign. And this is very, very important to know that women in politics will face violence. So there is a huge, I am also a certified trainer in women political participation from UN Women and Leadership. And this part is very important to know that you will face violence and you have to be ready. First time I had this website against me, I had one tear going down, and my team told me, this is why, because you are strong and you are having, you are endangering them. This is why they are doing this. So I felt very strong and powerful. And since nothing matters to me, so I run a campaign, and I don't care about violence. But I mean, you need to prepare women to this. That we are not prepared naturally. You know, I don't do violence to anybody. So having this against me in this way is very hard. They have to know it. Once they have like accepted it, like this will not kill me, I will be the warrior that will succeed, the campaign is won.
The education is important, but you know, for the one who wanted to know, how do we make girls enabled to take a stand on anything? A number of years ago, there was a man who was being paroled near walking distance from schools in the Bay Area, and he raped kids at knife point. But why he was let out is a whole other topic to be discussed. But no one really could stop him from being paroled until we contacted the mothers in the PTA, and we contacted mothers in a local, believe it or not, beauty shop. And we said, listen, and listen very carefully. He's about to be paroled. This is what he was paroled. The crimes were, and he's within walking distance of the schools. Folks, within 2.5 hours, we had women who probably never picketed in their life were picketing in front of the place that he was going. Within 48 hours, he was taken from that area and lifted into an industrial complex with no kids or schools anywhere in sight. And my story to the mothers and women in my audience is, never ever tangle with a mother, aunt, godmother, friend of child. Never, ever, because you may think that you're never going to be in politics. You may think that you're never going to be going on a platform. But if someone's messing with a child you love, whole different ballgame. For that reason, we need to educate them and give them the tools.
Yes, I would say very very important education when your
Yeah.
daughters are young. Give them the same
Yes.
spirit, the same courage as
Yeah.
boys.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother, my grandmother told me, you are capable of everything. You will be the president of the country. I said yes, and I am very much convinced of this. So please give this strength to your daughters and granddaughters.
And they'll
Well,
support you, gentlemen, in the style you could become accustomed to. Just saying.
I think with this strong, empowering message, we can go home now and change the world, really. So I would like to thank you all. This is 5 p.m. So here from Vienna, thank you for the speakers in New York. Thank you, Pavlina. Thank you, Evelyn. Evelyn will fly to New York tomorrow to join the group and to be actively engaged in the discussions there. So we are looking forward to receiving then a summary to hear in the coming meetings to have feedback, etc., etc. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon and a good rest of the day in New York. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
applause for everyone.
Thank you.
Get on.
Wait until they close it.
See you soon.
Bye.